Florida, a gray morning shrouded like a haze of memory. On a wooden bench beside the dew-soaked grass, Cris Carter sits silently, hands braced on his knees, his breath heavy from a body once a symbol of strength and will. Hall of Fame, 2013. 8 consecutive Pro Bowls, over 1,100 receptions, and 130 touchdowns, numbers that not only etched his name into NFL history, but also made him one of American football's most enduring icons. From an underrated rookie, Carter became the Hands of Minnesota, the hero who saved games in their final seconds. When the team stood on the brink, the ball sailed toward number 80, and the entire stadium held its breath. He taught America that resilience could work miracles, that failure wasn't the end but the starting point for those who refused to surrender. In the stands, tens of thousands chanted his name, believing no catch was beyond him. But glory isn't a free gift. At 60, the hands once soft as a musical instrument are now swollen and gnarled with arthritis. Neck, shoulders, and knees ache with every weather change. The old radio replays highlights from 20 years ago. Touchdown, Cris Carter, a sound that once sent America roaring, now echoing in an empty house where he sits, head bowed. "Every cheer used to keep me alive," he says softly, "but now it's the silence that drowns out everything." Sleepless nights find him staring at a photo of the 1,998 Vikings, his heart beating slowly, remembering faces lost to injury, depression, or the addictions he too once faced. Sometimes he forgets where he played or how many points he scored, and that terrifies him more than death itself. Each morning, he massages his joints to move, walks slowly in the backyard, counting steps as if counting years. Yet in Carter's eyes, one thing never fades: the fire of a man who swore he'd never fall. He'd hit rock bottom, lost himself, and from the rubble, he rose, rebuilding his life, finding a value greater than any trophy, the value of a man who conquered the darkness within. This isn't just a story of glory. It's the story of a man who died once in his own life and learned to live again from the ashes of his past. Middletown, Ohio, a small town amid factory roads and the heavy smell of burning steel, where football dreams were inflated like tickets out of poverty, but most led only to disappointment. In the 1,970 seconds, there were no miracles, only mothers working 2 jobs, fathers who vanished, and kids who learned to survive faster than they learned to love. In the Carter family's small apartment, a dim yellow light fell on the face of a skinny boy, his eyes a mix of anger and yearning. His mother, Joyce, worked night shifts at the hospital and extra hours at a nursing home, her voice hoarse with exhaustion, her hands calloused from labor. His father was barely present, leaving only a few photos and an emptiness that made every dinner feel longer. The small house was always filled with arguments, sometimes the clatter of dishes, sometimes just a suffocating silence. There were no hugs, no praise, only reminders. Don't be a burden. At an age when others played, Cris learned that love was a luxury in this world. His brother Butch was the only one who saw the loneliness in his eyes, pulling him to the dirt lot behind the house, tossing him his first football. "If you want to live, catch it," Butch said. The 12-year-old's hands shook. He missed, fell, scraped his knees bloody, but in that moment, he felt something he'd never had presence, a glance. From that day, the dirt lot became his private church. When night fell and other kids slept, Cris went to the yard, throwing the ball alone under flickering streetlights, the ball hitting the wall and bouncing back, over and over until his hands bled. Each catch was a silent prayer. "See me, someone." At school, Cris wasn't a star student. He was mischievous, defiant, often kicked out of class. Teachers saw him as trouble. Peers saw him as different. But when the ball touched his hands, he transformed fast, precise, fierce. What life took from him, recognition, was repaid in those fleeting seconds on the field. In Middletown, where many boys were swallowed by drugs, poverty, and illiteracy, Carter saw sports as his only bridge out of the darkness. But that belief was also a chain, for he began to fear that if he stopped playing, he'd vanish. On winter evenings, snow falling lightly, Carter still went to the yard, his thin shirt soaked with sweat, catching balls bouncing off the wall, the thud echoing like his heartbeat. He had no close friends, no father, no one to share his fears with. Only Butch, his brother, both a pillar and a stern reminder not to waste the only chance you've got. Carter grew up between two opposites: the scarce love his brother tried to preserve for them both, and a cold world outside that cared only for scores and strength. While other kids dreamed of parents cheering in the stands, Carter dreamed only of a pat on the shoulder. I'm proud of you. But it never came. The better he got, the lonelier he became, for each success only revealed the emptiness inside. And every night, as the town slept, Cris Carter, the boy never saved, threw the ball at the old wall, hearing it bounce back, dry and repetitive, until his eyes stung with cold and his hands bled. The ball flew, returned, fell, leaving only the echo of himself in the dark. The stadium lights at Ohio State blazed like 1,000 suns. The crowd's cheers thundered through the October air, reverberating across the scarlet stands. On the field, Cris Carter, the tall student in jersey number 2, sprinted as if every childhood pain burned in his steps. Each catch was a small explosion, as if he were daring the world that abandoned him. "Look at me!" And they did. In 1986, Carter became one of America's best All-American, Ohio State's brightest star. But the more he was celebrated, the emptier he felt. The crowd clapped, but no one truly knew him. After each win, Carter sat alone in the locker room, ears ringing with cheers, heart hollow. He had everything the Middletown boy dreamed of: attention, admiration, but joy never came. The higher he climbed, the more he felt an invisible hand pulling him toward the abyss. Then came the mistake. A wealthy sports agent approached, promising money, fame, lucrative contracts. Carter signed, unaware of the consequences. He violated NCAA rules and was banned from his final season. When the news broke, the media tore him apart. Teammates distanced themselves. Carter betrayed the Buckeyes, the headlines read. From hero to traitor. For the 1-year-old, it was the first and most painful blow. "I thought people would stand by me," he said later. "But I learned that when you fall, the crowd only comes to watch you hit the ground." Carter left Ohio State in silence, carrying shame no one could wash away. In 1987, the Philadelphia Eagles picked him in the supplemental draft. It should have been a new start, the NFL, the real dream. But the dream quickly became a trap. Carter entered the league with cold eyes, a forced smile, and a deep fear that if he didn't shine, he'd disappear. He started drinking to sleep, using cocaine to stay sharp, then both to forget the void he couldn't fill. In the Eagles' locker room, he was a blazing talent. Off the field, he was a soul unraveling. After games, when the lights dimmed and teammates left, Carter sat alone in the stadium bathroom, hands trembling with a beer can, staring into the mirror. "Who's that?" he asked his reflection. No answer. Cold sweat mixed with rainwater dripping from the roof, reflecting a face he no longer recognized. Each touchdown, he'd look to the stands, hearing thousands chant his name. But in his heart, only an empty echo. "You're nobody." By the end of the 1989 season, Carter had fallen too far. Late to practice, body exhausted, mind foggy, failed drug tests, team meetings where he nearly dozed off. Finally, Coach Buddy Ryan declared bluntly, "He's done. No mercy, no second chance." One August day, Carter was called to the office, cut from the team. No one saw him off. No one wished him luck. The press called him a lost cause, a genius who self-destructed. That night, in a small Philadelphia apartment, Carter sat on his bed, TV off, window open, cold wind rushing in. On the table were empty bottles, old newspapers, and in the trash a broken syringe. He bowed his head, hands shaking, tears falling to the floor. "I had money, fame, everything, he said later, but I was dying inside. He sobbed not for losing his contract, but for realizing he'd lost everything without knowing why. No one knocked, no one called. Only his erratic heartbeat filled the empty room, the clock ticking like a countdown to something. His whole life, he'd run from silence. Now silence enveloped him like a cold blanket. It wasn't the last time he'd hit the floor, but it was the first time he truly heard his heart beat in the dark, the sound of a man at rock bottom, and the first pulse of his journey back. In the fall of 1990, when every door seemed shut, a small one cracked open. The Minnesota Vikings claimed Cris off waivers for a token salary. No one cared, no headlines blared. To experts, it was a cheap gamble, a worthless contract. At training camp in Minneapolis, Carter showed up in old Eagles gear, shoulders gaunt, eyes sunken. No one welcomed him. No one believed he'd last a season. They called him the lucky addict, a whisper he heard louder than the wind. That first night in Minnesota, Carter lay in a small rented room, staring at the ceiling, tears soaking his pillow. He clasped his hands and prayed, "God, give me one more down. Just one more chance. I won't mess it up again." The next morning he woke before everyone, running in the snow, breathing air so cold it burned his lungs. Each step was a promise, each drop of sweat an atonement. He spoke little, just trained, worked, existed on iron discipline. When teammates rested, he caught balls for an extra hour. When coaches looked away, he ran drills again. Every morning, he woke with 3 words in a small notebook. "Stay clean today." No need for a future, just one clean day. And day by day, he reclaimed what he'd lost faith. First in himself, then in his teammates. They began to see in Carter's eyes not arrogance, but a quiet fire. The fire of someone who'd seen hell. He turned every doubt into fuel. Each catch, each hit, he gave his all not to score, but to prove to God he deserved to live another day. By 1993, in his 4th season with the Vikings, the world saw a miracle. He became the hands of God, hands that clung to hope. No one remembered the outcast. Now he was Minnesota's cornerstone. In 1994, 122 receptions, an NFL record. In 1995, 17 more touchdowns. From a nobody, he became a legend. In the 90 seconds, whenever football blared on TV, Carter's image arms outstretched. Catching midair became iconic. A man who couldn't fall. But behind each perfect catch was a dull pain in his knee, a sharp throb in his temple. Heavy hits left their mark. His spine ached, shoulders swelled, hands stiffened. Before games, he swallowed painkillers. After, he lay breathless on ice. He knew he was paying a price, but kept going, because Carter, who'd been to hell, no longer feared pain. "Pain reminds me I'm still alive," he told teammates. Each time he left the field, he moved slower, but his eyes stayed bright, hands open as if ready for any throw. In 1998, the Vikings went 15-1. Carter standing in a Minneapolis blizzard, eyes teary from the cold, the crowd screaming his name. In that moment, he didn't see the crowd or cameras, only the Middletown boy who threw alone at a wall. That boy was finally seen. But deep down, he knew he wasn't at peace. Outside was glory. Inside, a ceaseless battle. Some nights after games, Carter lay awake, staring at the hotel ceiling, cheers still ringing in his head. He touched his swollen knee, heard his bones creak, breathed hard to push away pain. Fans saw him on the field calm, confident, unshaken. Only he knew his hands trembled each morning from painkillers. Glory came at the cost of blood, but Carter didn't complain. Each pain was a reminder. He was still here, still doing what he was born to do. In 2000, he became a living Vikings legend, described by broadcasters as an emotionless catching machine. But in Carter's mind, it wasn't emotionless, it was pride mixed with fear, because he knew all lights fade, all cheers die. And when that came, He had to be ready to stand alone, like that cold night in Philadelphia. At his peak, Carter realized, he caught everything on the field, but he could never catch peace. He grasped fame, respect, cheers, everything but peace. When the final whistle blew, he bowed his head, hand on chest, whispering thanks to God, not for winning, but for living another day, staying clean another day. In Minnesota, they called him the Survivor. Carter, looking at his red, swollen hands, only smiled faintly, knowing he'd kept the promise from that first snowy night. He lived, fought, and refused to die. After retiring, Cris Carter thought he could finally breathe. No more grueling schedules, no crashing tackles, no pressure to be an icon of perfection. But peace never came. Each morning, he woke with a head like someone was hammering from inside. The dull, heavy pain lingered all day, sometimes forcing him to his knees in the living room, unable to stand. The body that was once his weapon now betrayed him, every joint, every nerve. His shoulders felt like they carried stones, his knees cracked climbing stairs. Worst was his head, once home to lightning reflexes, now a foggy haze. Some days he forgot why he walked into the kitchen. Once, driving, he couldn't recall the way home. Doctors called it chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, the disease that stole memories from other legends. When the doctor said, "One day you might not remember your kids' names," Carter sat silent, eyes distant, hands gripping the table's edge. He'd faced death, overcome addiction, but never felt fear like that. How could he live if he forgot the faces of those he loved? After that appointment, he returned to his Florida home, sat on the porch watching waves crash, his head still buzzing. He thought of old teammates, those who'd shared his blood and sweat, now only in memories and black and white photos. Some died from CTE, others took their lives, unable to bear the pain and isolation. Some fell back into addiction, dying on sofas in empty apartments, like Carter nearly did in Philadelphia. Each funeral buried a piece of him. His hands shook, placing purple and gold flowers on coffins, his eyes heavy. "I caught thousands of balls," he said softly, "but I couldn't hold on to the people I loved. Florida nights, wind blowing through the window." In the dark, Carter lay still, eyes open, hearing his heartbeat like a ticking clock. The headaches weren't just physical, they were memories of hits, collisions, screams from the past. He pictured himself, the young man diving into tackles without fear, now curled up in the dark, afraid of his own brain. The stadium noise was gone, but in his head it lingered, distorted, chaotic, like echoes of an old dream that wouldn't fade. The field was gone. The noise was gone. Only pain stayed. Carter lived in two worlds, one where people called him a legend, and the real one where he was a 60-year-old man taking painkillers to sleep. His Boca Raton home was beautiful, quiet, but the quieter it was, the louder the cracks in his memory. Walls hung with medals and old photos, but sometimes he paused, staring at faces, taking seconds to recall their names. His greatest fear wasn't death, but the slow erasure of himself. Some nights he sat on the porch for hours, looking at the ocean. Waves crashed, wind howled, insects hummed, but to him, it all felt foreign. The emptiness was like post-game. Stands empty, lights off, just him and the dark. He'd won on the field, but in the battle with time, with his body, he was a desperate defender. Sometimes, memories flooded back: a teammate's laugh, a spectacular catch, a raised hand after a win. Then they vanished like smoke, leaving a lingering ache from neck to head. Carter buried his face in his hands, tears falling, unsure if from sadness or physical pain. At times, he sought solace in faith, reading the Bible, praying, but in the pain, even prayers grew vague. "God gave me another chance," he told himself, "and maybe he's testing how much I can endure." Each morning, he rose early, walked the neighborhood slowly, carefully, like relearning to exist. Some days, neighbors recognized him, smiling, "You're Cris Carter, right?" He nodded lightly, avoiding talk of the legend, for to him, the legend died with the stadium lights. What remained was a man quietly fighting his past. At home, he paused before the mirror, touching his temple, feeling the pulse under thin skin. "Still here," he whispered. But in his eyes, something fragile lingered, as if each day was a new game, no opponent, just time and fading memories. Duron Carter was born in the years when Cris was still lost between his career and the darkness. Back then, he was a Minnesota Vikings player, rebuilding his life, learning to stay clean one day at a time. Baby Duron came into the world like a new breath, but deep down, Cris hadn't forgiven himself. Holding his son, he saw in those eyes both hope and a warning. If you fall again, you'll drag everything down with you. Carter once said, "Duron didn't come to make me happy. He came to teach me responsibility." But fatherhood for him was a journey both sacred and terrifying. He feared Duron would see the cracks in his soul, feared his son growing up in the shadow of a legend and a man who nearly died from addiction. When Duron was young, Carter rarely slept soundly. He'd wake in the night, check if his son was still breathing, then stand watching for a long time. It was the obsession of a man who'd lost control, afraid of losing one more thing. Years later, as Duron grew, he chose football too. Same position as his father, wide receiver. Same hunger, same hands. Cris was both proud and afraid. He knew football wasn't just a game. It was a double-edged sword. It had lifted him from hell, but it nearly pulled him back into the abyss. Each time he saw Duron take a hard tackle, Carter clenched his fists, the old pain in his knee flaring as if he'd been hit too. He remembered the doctor's words, "Your body could break down any time." Now, he feared that for his son. One night, after a game where Duron took a heavy hit to the shoulder, Cris quietly entered his son's room. Duron still had ice on his neck, the bedside lamp casting light on his exhausted face. Carter sat by the bed, took his son's hand, voice hoarse. "You inherited my hands, but don't inherit my darkness." Duron stayed silent, then nodded slightly, eyes welling up. Father and son sat quietly, the silence between them holding what didn't need words: love, fear, redemption, and a fragile hope that history wouldn't repeat. From then on, they built a small ritual. Each evening, when possible, they went to the backyard practice field. Under dim streetlights, their shadows stretched across the grass. Cris threw, hands trembling from stiff joints. Duron leapt, catching with young, strong, steady hands. The ball sailed through the light and landed softly like a prayer. Father through son caught no words, just the steady thud echoing in the night, a reminder that their bloodline endured, that every mistake could be redeemed if love was enough. But for Cris Carter, redemption wasn't just from fatherhood. He began spending time with young players, especially those grappling with addiction, pressure, or the loneliness after the spotlight. He spoke plainly, hiding none of his past. Addiction never sleeps. He'd start. It doesn't vanish when you're famous. It just waits for you to tire. Those words, low and heavy, came not from a speaker but from a man who'd lain on the floor, breathing in despair. Carter visited recovery centers, entering small, damp rooms where gaunt youths shared stories of ruin. He listened, didn't judge, just placed a hand on their shoulder and said, "I've been there. If I'm alive, you can be too." That was his redemption, not on the field, but in the shadows of rooms thick with the smell of medicine and sweat. He no longer caught balls but caught falling souls. When invited to speak at NFL conferences, he didn't talk about trophies but about the night he nearly died in Philadelphia. The trembling hands, the tears in an empty apartment. "I'm not here to brag about winning," he said. "I'm here to remind you I lost and survived." Many young people sought him out afterward, calling him coach, uncle, or simply Cris. He smiled gently, a smile that took years to return. The wounds remained, the physical pain knocked each morning, but his soul was calmer. One night, after a talk, Carter came home to find Duron practicing alone. He threw the ball high, moonlight glinting off his sweaty face. Carter watched, then stepped forward, picked up the fallen ball, and tossed it back. "One more," he said. Duran laughed, lunging to catch it. The ball landed perfectly in his hands. Hands like his father's once were, only brighter, cleaner, freer. Cris Carter watched, looked to the sky, and whispered, "Thank you, God, for showing me light doesn't die after darkness." At 60, he no longer needed stadiums or cheers. Seeing his son smile, seeing those he helped stand again, was enough. His redemption wasn't a glorious moment, but quiet days reclaimed each fearless breath, each ball thrown between generations. In Florida's quiet night, dim lights fell on two shadows, a man who refused to die, and a son learning to live. Between them, the ball arced slowly, carrying legacy, love, and a promise that the light would never fade. But no matter how resilient, light can't banish all darkness. After years of rebuilding, Cris Carter became a mentor, invited everywhere to speak on resilience, faith, and rising from the depths. But behind the inspiring speeches, he noticed cracks widening not in his body, but in his generation. One by one, the faces he'd laughed and bled with on the field disappeared. One died from a painkiller overdose. Another was found in a car, dead by suicide from depression. Some still lived but no longer recognized anyone, their brains ravaged by hundreds of collisions. Carter marked each name in an old notebook, hands trembling slightly. Each name was a call from the past. Once, hearing that a teammate from the 1,993 team photo had died, he sat staring at the picture for hours. Someone once said football players never retire. They leave the field to slowly die. That haunted Carter. He wondered if he was on that path just slower than the others. That summer, Minnesota's sun blazed. A funeral was held in a small suburban church, the coffin draped in the Vikings' purple and gold flag. Carter stood in the front row, hands clasped, face wet with sweat and tears. When the pastor asked him to speak, he stepped up, looking at his friend's photo, the man who once called him brother. His mouth opened, but no words came. Finally, he whispered, "I thought football saved me, but sometimes it kills us slowly." The words hung in the silent room, a confession for a generation. After the service, he went to the cemetery, knelt, and touched the gravestone. The sun set, light fading from the sky. A breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and cicadas. Carter closed his eyes, hearing the old cheers echo faintly, noise that followed him his whole life, now just a distant hum. That night, he returned home, turned on the old TV, and watched 1,998 highlights. On the screen, teammates ran, laughed, high-fived. Each face that appeared, he named silently. Some still lived, some were gone, some no longer knew who they were. The screen's light flickered on his face, eyes wet, both pained and tender, as if seeing ghosts of a past that wouldn't let go. "I survived. They didn't. Why me?" he wrote in his notebook. The words slanted from a shaking hand. That question haunted him for years, unanswered. Survivor's guilt, the feeling he should have gone with them, clung to him. Carter began avoiding crowds, TV appearances, speaking less. He spent nights in his study, a dim desk lamp casting light on old photos. Him, Randy Moss, Jake Reed, 3 deep. They once shook a city. Now it was just him and memories. He lit a small candle, then another, and another. Each was a name: Reggie, Corey, Junior, Demarius brothers who didn't return. The flames wavered, lighting his face, casting blurred shadows on the wall. He watched them, seeing both glory and pain. The candles flickered like heartbeats, fragile but fighting to exist in the wind. Sometimes, Duran stepped in behind him, asking, "What are you doing, Dad?" Carter just smiled, talking to old friends. His son looked, not fully understanding, but seeing in his eyes a gentle sadness time couldn't erase. When Duran left, Carter stayed, watching the candles melt, wax pooling on the table, flames casting faint light on the ceiling like a distant stadium in memory. He whispered, as if to himself, "We gave everything to be seen, but no one taught us how to live after the lights went out." A breeze from the window made the flames waver. Carter cupped his hand, shielding them from dying. In that moment, he knew his existence, painful, lonely, was a duty. He lived to tell their stories, to keep lit the candles they couldn't. In Florida's silent night, when all other lights faded, those candles burned, each flame a heartbeat refusing to stop, a memory of brothers he couldn't save. Now, at 60, Cris Carter is no longer the man sprinting between blazing sidelines to deafening cheers. He lives quietly in Florida, in a small house near the coast, where salty wind and night waves lap at the porch like time's slow breath. His body is scarred on skin, in bones, in memory, but his eyes are kinder, calmer than ever. He mentors at Florida Atlantic's football team, teaching kids how to run routes, read defenses, and most importantly, how to keep their hearts from slipping off the fragile line between fame and self-destruction. When he speaks, he doesn't use the legend's image, but that of a man who lost everything and found himself again. He tells the truth about addiction, sleepless nights, the moments he wanted to end it all. "The Hall of Fame didn't save me from those white nights," he says slowly, "but those white nights taught me to save others." The young players look at him, not seeing a monument but a father old, in pain, but still standing, still resilient. Outside coaching, Carter spends time at recovery centers, sitting with addicts trying to rebuild. He enters damp rooms, the smell of antiseptic mixing with despair, and shares his story, from being cut by the Eagles, to crying in an empty apartment, to praying, "God, give me one more down." When he finishes, the room is silent, no applause, just a few heads bowed, quietly crying. To them, he's not a star but living proof that even the deepest fall can lead back. At home, by his bedside, a row of pill bottles, painkillers, sleep aids, nerve meds sits neatly like an old lineup. Each night, he arranges them but takes only one. "If I need a pile of pills to forget the pain," he says, "what's the difference from back then?" Instead, he endures, learning to live with pain like an old friend. Each morning, he rises early, does physical therapy in silence. Hands tremble, back stiffens, steps slow but steady. He counts breaths like lost years, each one a small victory. When sweat hits the floor, he smiles, as if each salty drop is thanks to God, to departed brothers, to the old self who fell but chose to rise. To Carter, his greatest wealth now isn't the numbers, trophies, or the faded purple jersey in a glass frame. He once had millions, but he learned the most precious thing is the people he pulled from the edge. "I was saved once," he said in a speech, "and the rest of my life is to repay that." At night, Carter often goes to the backyard where he and Duran once practiced. The grass is taller now, the light dimmer, but the air still holds the scent of memory. He holds a football, tosses it lightly, catches it with trembling hands. The catch isn't perfect, but to him, it's a miracle proof he can still hold something. The evening breeze lifts his worn Vikings shirt, his white hair fluttering. Carter looks up at the sky, streaked with orange and purple, the colors of sunsets he survived to see. In that moment, he feels no pain, no regret, only peace. He whispers, as if to himself, "Fame fades, the body decays, but if my pain helps one person choose to live, I've won." In the distance, Duran calls, his laugh crackling through the phone. "You good, Dad?" Carter replies, "I'm good, son, just catching balls with the wind." They laugh together. Inside the house, the photos on the wall, young Carter, the Vikings, the lost ones, seem to glow in the sunset. He walks in, turns off the light, and in the dark, still sees the quiet light of years lived truly, hurt truly, loved truly. Cris Carter no longer runs. He stands in life as proof that even when the body breaks, the soul can stand tall. And for those who think they've fallen too far to return, his story is a quiet message. You can, because I did. If his journey makes you believe anyone can start again, leave a tribute for the man who caught his life back from the dark. Cris Carter's story isn't just a biography of a great athlete. It's evidence of the true cost of the American dream. This is a man who came from Middletown, Ohio, a kid raised in a cramped apartment, no father, no gentle hugs, only the reminder, don't be a burden. It's a start no child should endure. And from that dark place, that boy threw a ball against a wall until his hands bled, silently screaming, "See me!" But what makes this story worth America's respect isn't just Carter's rise from poverty to the Hall of Fame. What makes it breathtakingly painful is what he sacrificed to get there and what he's still paying today. He nearly lost everything in Philadelphia. Addicted to alcohol, cocaine, cut by the Eagles, alone to the point of sobbing in an empty apartment with the TV off and a syringe in the trash. That wasn't a scandal. It was a man dying inside. He climbed back to become the hands of God in Minnesota, the man a city pinned its hopes on with number 80. And then, as America celebrated him, reality stayed cruel. A broken body, relentless headaches, memory fading to the point where a doctor said plainly, "One day you might not remember your kids' names." No trophy shielded him from those words, and still he stood. Still went to rehab centers to tell trembling kids, just as he once trembled, addiction never sleeps. Still watched his son Duran play the same position, praying not for wins but for survival. Still lit candles for brothers who didn't return, whispering, "I survived. They didn't. Why me?" At 60, when many think of rest, he still rises each morning and relearns how to stand tall. So what's the lesson for us Americans watching football on Sundays, calling it entertainment? The lesson is, the glory we consume like a product is someone trading their body and soul. The lesson is, addiction doesn't care about wealth, fame, or obscurity, and recovery isn't a moment but a daily discipline. And the biggest lesson is, a person's true worth isn't in how many touchdowns they score but in choosing, at the edge of the abyss, to save themselves and then others. Carter isn't perfect. He wasn't clean from the start. He wasn't lifted by privilege. Carter is the kind of American who pulled himself from the mud with shaking hands. That's why we must honor him not just for catching every ball, but for refusing to fall again. If Cris Carter's story makes you believe that even in the deepest darkness, people can find light, hit subscribe to join us in celebrating resilient journeys of rebirth. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next video, where we continue telling stories of those who fell, rose, and left America lessons that never fade.